So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick off the Q&A. And you've spoken about lots of different things, but one thing I'm quite interested to know is what keeps you up at night? What's your biggest fear, so to speak?
Rereading my team's stuff to make sure they haven't made a mistake. No, I'm just kidding. I have members here. I don't have to do that. Actually, I think the thing that keeps me up at night most kind of sits in, is I've had the opportunity to sit at the board of the firm, which has been a blessing and also a curse at the same time, because at some level someone's picked your head up and kind of said, you need to look this way, and therefore you can never look another way again. And so I think the big thing that keeps me up is really just thinking about how the world's changing around what my firm does and provision of legal advice and services. And I certainly have, through the experiences I've had, whether it's been with representing the UN and being involved in corporate sustainability, whether it's because I travel the world speaking to so many different clients, that I think that for my industry and my firm in particular, the world's really changing around us and we're playing a bit of catch up. And competition's so intense around providing client service and activities that actually we need to really think differently about what we do and how we do it. And I've got an organization of of people with mixed experiences. I've got very senior partners who grew up in a very different world than perhaps the one that I've grown up in, and the one that, associates that are working for us now, and people having to come through the door. And you've got to kind of bring those two things together, kind of move the organization forward without disenfranchising people along the way. And I think the thing those are the types of things that really keep me up at night, which is how to move our organization forward for tomorrow, for our clients, while still maintaining our success, but actually causing that change to happen with an organization that is a bit impervious to change. And so you can spend a lot of time knocking your head against the wall, but it's that persistence of just trying to choose those things to chivvy away so that over time we've changed the organization, whether it's because we think that the type of work we're doing needs to change, because the type of clients we have needs to change, because the way we do our job needs to change, because our environment in terms of being diverse or inclusive needs to change. There's so many things. Those are the things that really keep me up at night, is actually operating a business for the future in a world that's changing constantly.
Okay. You also mentioned about portfolio careers, and it's important to have a wide breadth of experience. If you're someone like myself and you have ambitions to, say, reach the top and get to board level, how does that mix and match, what piece of advice, rather, would you offer someone to really get them to the top or stand out from the crowd? Because there's so many different people out there and there's only a finite amount of positions at the top.
Yeah, I think, being a board director is an important measure of success. It's an aspect of success. I've had the fortune of sitting in front of many boards, and I don't think many of them felt very lucky at the time that I was necessarily standing in front of them all the time. I think it is a great position, but I think one thing, you should have your ambitions a bit wider than just that. And personally, but this is a very personal thing, is I always thought the highest measure of success was running my own business and actually being the one who employs and uses capital and creates jobs. And I guess as a NED you can do that, but I think you need to define success in your own terms. And if that's being a NED, then great, you should be a board director. If it's being a CEO, that's great. If it's actually running your own business, that's great. Actually, you need to define it in your own terms. And we've talked a little bit about the things that I think, but I think this is such a hard thing to actually live up to, but I'll say it anyway, which is don't settle. There are so many forces in your career that will force you to settle along the way. And I want to distinguish settling versus actually biding your time, because there's always a time where there's a right place and a right opportunity, and all of us will need to bide time at different points. That's a strategic decision in the process of moving forward. Settling to me is something different. Settling is being taken in and then deciding that, well, that's kind of good enough. Or that's okay, somebody said no, or somebody's put something in my way, and therefore I'm not going to move beyond it. To me, never settle. Never take what somebody's giving you, not from a I deserve more perspective, but more actually how can I then move beyond? How can I regroup and then keep moving forward? I always tell people that the difference between success and failure is actually oftentimes your attitude towards those things, not actually in the facts that are in front of you. And you just have to, kind of using a football term, you kind of have to stick and move. You have to kind of hit and then be ready to move left and right, which is why I think it's more and more important to have a portfolio career, because I just think it's increasingly unlikely that you'll have a straight line wherever you go. The world is changing much too quickly. And therefore, I think if you're open to create those flexibilities, you're not settling and you're being flexible, always moving forward, even if you're biding your time, that to me is that's the key thing. Don't settle. Just bide your time, be strategic, find that next thing and move forward.
My name is Elsie. For a portfolio, creating a portfolio, for someone who's starting a career, how exactly does that person weigh the options of doing that? Yet, when you go to apply for a job immediately after university, you're told you have to have 5 years, yet you're just starting a career. How exactly do you weigh the options of strategic alliance? Yeah.
Well, I think it goes back to some of the things I said. One is you're building a portfolio career, you have to give it enough time. So in other words, when you walk into the door, you can't be thinking about leaving, right? That's not the objective. The objective is, well, I've chosen this, I've been given an opportunity in this position. What is it that I want to achieve out of it? And by that, it's going to be somewhat internally generated. What is it that you're trying to achieve over the arc of your career? And if you don't know that, over the arc of your period, over the relevant period. But also it's going to be by looking at what people are doing in the organization and seeing what your pathway forward may be. And a portfolio career doesn't always have to be changing companies. It can be changing roles and doing something different within a company. But I think at the beginning of the career, I'm a firm believer, and I don't think this changes, that building a career is like building a house. You have to have a good foundation in order to make a first floor, in order to make a second floor. Now the first floor and the second floor can be of your choosing, but you have to make it a strong foundation. So when you're leaving school, when you're starting your career, you really need to focus on some of the core skill sets in whatever it is you're doing. Whether that's becoming, building up your expertise in being a lawyer or being a banker or whatever it is you may want to do, you have to solidify that core skill set. You always have to be excellent at what you do. You cannot be anything less and expect that you're going to be able to compete. So an assumption, probably I should have stated, is that whatever you're doing it to the best of your ability, and you're trying to actually become the best and master it before you move on. Because if you're able to master skills at different points in your career, you'll then be able to build a true portfolio career that allows you to develop. But alongside that, you need to work with people. You need to learn from the people who are actually doing that job to learn a broad skill set. So I think going out of school, you do the job to the best of your ability, you build your foundation, and then that will create, with your relationships and the options, flexibilities about where you then take it.
Hi, I'm Monica. You talked about the world changing rapidly, and you've touched upon jobs that don't exist at the moment. Can you give some concrete examples of, areas of work that's changed a lot that you didn't think you'd see in your lifetime? And can you give us a little idea about perhaps the changes that are coming for the legal world and maybe finance and private equity?
Yeah, sure. So, the first question, there are so many things. I can reach in my pocket and pull this out and say, this is a marvel to me. This is essentially a supercomputer in my pocket. I remember one of the first deals I did was for a telecommunications company back when they had the Nokia phones. The screen was, maybe 4 apps wide. And they were talking about being able to watch TV and order pizza and stuff on the phone. And I was sitting there like, you gotta be kidding me. There's no way that you're gonna be able to wanna watch TV or order pizza on a phone. Why would I wanna do that? I'll just call the pizza place. And the point being is that if you think about all the jobs and opportunities, the Googles, the Yahoos, the Dennises that are sitting here today because of the way in which social communications, mobile communications, telecommunications, social media have evolved, that world didn't exist when I was coming up, for example. And you know, I know I just said to Dennis, I like to think I'm young. I'm not that young, I'm 44. So, you know, but when I was coming up in the 80s, you know, that was not a contemplation. I remember my first phone that my dad gave me in a car, and it was about like this big and had its own aerial, and I had to shove it under the seat because it wouldn't fit anywhere else. But, and there's so many jobs, there's so many issues like that. I mean, even private equity, for example, that did not exist in the form that it exists in when I was first a lawyer. You know, it was a small niche practice. I remember we were having our first conversations around private equity. Is this something we should do? Not, oh, it's not main M&A, why are we going to do that? It's taken over the whole M&A market. So there are so many aspects of what we're doing today that just didn't exist 5, 10, certainly not 18 years ago. The things that I'm doing, for example, I'm now fully enmeshed in corporate sustainability and the meaning of corporate sustainability. I work with the UN, I advise the UN on corporate sustainability. When I first started, even 5 years ago, to think about being involved in corporate sustainability and it being an advisory practice, something we get paid to do, no way. So that kind of change happens, you know, all the time. You know, for the legal profession, obviously there's different aspects of the legal profession, so I'll talk about it from kind of the Linklaters perspective. I think there's so much going on. You know, one of the big things that's going on, I think, in our profession is what we call efficiency. It's not really efficiency, it's more about the way in which we deliver our client services. Because if you think about a value chain, and we like to think that we operate at a premium end of a value chain. So we do big deals that clients are willing to pay, bet the farm prices for, and that's what we specialize in. Well, that work has changed over time, from M&A to also including dispute resolution to perhaps including advice on sustainability. But the fact is that clients are under their own cost pressures, and therefore we're not being able to recruit necessarily the same level of profit margin doing what we did 5 years ago tomorrow. So we have to change the way we work. We have to get more efficient in the way we deploy our resources. So we have to disaggregate what we provide and how we provide it, and find more efficient ways to bring in resource, but at the same time, so for example, use project management skills rather than expensive legal resource to do project management. We have to get more efficient in how we deliver advice to clients, because we're not going to get paid for getting to the point of delivery of advice. We'll get paid for when we actually deliver something. So the whole model's changing. So that's one side, but at the same time, I've got to think about how to develop my team, because a lot of the simple work that we used to do, small M&A deals, small dispute resolutions, things that kind of taught people how to cut their teeth as being lawyers, we can't get paid for anymore. So how do I then train my team to be the lawyers that they need to be 5 and 10 years from now, based on a skill set which no longer is relevant because we don't do it, and that the way that I became a partner is not the way that, you know, Alex sitting back there may become a partner, or any of the other associates that I work with. I've got to think about that and get them ready for that world. But I can't do that alone. I need to hear from my clients, I need to hear from them, I need to be involved in that conversation. So that's what I talk about the world changing a bit. And those are real fundamental changes to how we operate as a business, deliver client services, achieve profitability, and therefore secure our long-term viability as an organization. That's just one example. I could give you 10 more.
My question is, what's your thoughts on pursuing a conventional career path, so say in law and finance, as opposed to being an entrepreneur and working on a startup where there's high risk in terms of where you're going to go?
It's a hard one to answer. It really depends on personal preferences and desires. I guess I'd say a couple things. Entrepreneurship, in my observation, it's kind of like flexibility. You have to learn and nurture that in order for it to actually be true and be worth something. And so what I mean by entrepreneurship is most entrepreneurs fail 90% of the time. But going back to something else I said, they learn something from that failure that helps them succeed in the future. They learn from the people across from them. So that failure doesn't become a blocker, it becomes a stick and move. Bide your time, find your opportunity, move forward. So entrepreneurship can only really be judged, in a way at the end or once you've made a success. Now, not everyone's going to be a successful entrepreneur. So if I were advising my kids, which is conservative father type advice, I might say, get your education, get some really, some sound skills in a traditional industry, whether that's banking, finance, whatever, law. And once you've done that and build that strong skill set, that foundation that I've talked about, then maybe do that. However, that is not the way that the world works today. And I think that people actually, it almost goes back to before I was a student, because that was the advice when I was a student. However, before that, people went in, for example, into trading when they were 18 years old in New York. They learned by doing. So I think I don't have an answer for whether you should go left or you should go right, but realize that if you become an entrepreneur, you're going to be failing a lot. So you better have the wherewithal to fail a lot in the young part of your career. If you go the traditional route, that's not necessarily the safest route for long-term happiness either, but it might prepare you better, at least give you that wherewithal to withstand failure, but you'll be starting at a later phase. So I don't have an answer for you. I think it's very much up to your own kind of desires and risk parameters. And I've seen many successful people who are well younger than I am. I remember I did the flotation of lastminute.com in 2000, I think it was, or 99. And I was sitting next to a guy who's a really nice guy, but we were about the same age. And I was helping him fill out his directors and offers questionnaire so that he could receive his 30 million pounds for floating the company. So I'll just leave you with that to say, I'm not sure who got the better end of that.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Katie. Tom, you mentioned earlier on in your speech about the importance of being open to change. What challenges have you faced sort of, from going from traditional model to sort of keeping up to date with new technology and how that sort of impacted your, legal practice?
I think it's a great question because as a lawyer, there's just something inbuilt about us about being conservative. It's maybe the precedential system that we operate to. So change is not something that we really embrace. And I figure that I'm on one end of the spectrum and I'm even reluctant in some respect to change. I really do think, and I was thinking about this earlier, that the type of flexibility you have to have is actually, it's like any other skill set. You have to feed it, nourish it, and train it in small ways every single day. Because it is so easy, I think, and particularly, and I know I'm at one end of the spectrum being at Linklaters, where we have fantastic clients who we have to work to get their work, but we get their work. And I could do $400 billion worth of deals and just have a wonderful career. I could keep on doing that every single day. And that would be fantastic. And it would be fantastic. No problem with that. But actually, going back to my thing about picking up the phone, you just have to sometimes be willing to say, well, actually, I'm not really familiar with that, but I'm going to give it a go. Or I'm going to every day do something a little bit differently, or I'm going to listen to what someone's saying a little bit differently and actually act upon it. And I think that's part of it, is being open to hearing conversations around you, because the idea that change isn't happening around you is actually the biggest limitation you can have. By believing your own BS and not being open to hearing people around you, that's what's going to stop you from changing. Actually, when you start engaging with people around you, listening to what they have to say, observing what they're doing, there's going to be something along the way which is going to pique your interest, and you have to be willing to say, yeah, I'm going to do something different. But that has to be done on a regular basis. You can't just become 44 and say, I'm going to change today. Okay, world, here I am. Give me a change. That's really hard. I think you have to actually build it in to part of your development throughout a career is actually pushing yourself to do something a little bit different all the time so that you get used to seeing that difference and then acting on it. And maybe one or two times there'll be a big change, but you'll be ready for it and you'll be able to take it.
I appreciate what you say about old habits dying hard. But at the same time now, I think a lot of people go to university, get a really good degree, and now there's lots of people with the same kind of qualifications all competing really hard to move on. I mean, when I look back to my own career 20 odd years ago, I work as a secretary now in London because I earn more than training as a food scientist. But the reason I didn't sort of pursue that career is because when I look back, I was young and I didn't know whether I wanted to study for a master's and a PhD. But now you've got people studying for master's and PhD and they're still having to maybe work for companies like Sports Direct one day, you know, on zero contract. And also they have to be very inventive and maybe be self-employed in other aspects. Listening to the radio now, they have this term now called the Precariat, you know, where some people are finding it really hard to get into a training place in the corporate world just on a graduate scheme because it's just so competitive.
So I guess my reaction to that is I think clearly that's right. I mean, but the bar just keeps getting raised. So in other words, you know, when I came through, having a college education a university education was the end all be all. When I went into work, the people who were getting in had postgraduate degrees. And every year the competitive playing field becomes higher in that respect. But I also think that the competitive playing field becomes wider too. And so I think that this goes to my point about actually being open to a portfolio and focusing on skills that you need to develop where you can develop them. Because I don't think that a linear career is easy because of the level of competition to get into a role, because of the competition once you get in there, and also because actually I'm not sure it's going to lead you to where you want to be at the end of the day. And so what I'd say to that is I think that it's that the playing field is wider than it used to be. There are many more opportunities, but they're not going to be the traditional opportunities that people employed. And therefore, I think that when you think about how to build a career, sometimes you do have to start from your right and then come to your left and then come to the center. But over time, you have to have a clear vision about how you're putting those pieces together. And that's one of the reasons I say that kind of having that linear idea, actually, I just don't think is really, it'll be fine for some and that's fine. But I'm not really sure that that's going to be the pathway forward in a hyper-competitive marketplace, particularly in a place in the UK. Well, where are you talking about? You're talking about London, right? So linear may also be using that passport you've got, that EU citizenship, going to the States, being open to that, because I think that actually you need to go where the opportunities are and where you can create them, and they're not always going to be here.
Thank you so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and watch the rest of our talks below.